I had no idea I was in hell the first year. Everyday life seemed the same, minus one detail. Nothing good happened. Ever. After I was fired from my job, I lost my fiancé to my best friend, and no one seemed to be on my side. Every person in my life was cold and distant. Even the little things in my life were awful. Food tasted terrible. My favorite shows were canceled. And something in my apartment always needed to be repaired or replaced. Each day was frigid, with rainy outcast. And the nights were eerily dark, void of stars and moonlight. During the second year, I concluded that I had either gone completely mad or was no longer living in the same world into which I was born. One morning, I powered up the TV. The local news was on. However, the anchors' faces appeared distorted and grainy. The screen strained my eyes as I stared. I turned off the TV and decided I would get some air and walk down to the corner store a few blocks from my apartment. When I walked inside, everyone stopped what they were doing and looked directly at me. The world froze, as if time was standing still, and my stomach turned. It was the people. Their faces were a jumble of features, eyes, nose, and mouths all swirled in a mess of flesh, hair, and teeth. They remained still as I bolted back out the door. Dead silence was everywhere I went, and every person stopped and turned in my direction, always watching my every move with their misplaced eyeballs. Hell was studying me, and it only got worse. If you ever wished you could be in complete seclusion, I'll be the first to tell you, it's not worth it. During my third year, I was completely alone. No jumbled-faced people, animals, or life in general. The world was a hollow reminder of what used to be. With no other plan in mind, I started wandering. I kept this up for months, until the depression, seclusion, and self-loathing started to wear on me. I had no idea where I was or what I should do. Eventually, it was too much for me to handle, and I gave up. I climbed to the top of the tallest building I could find and jumped. I felt the entire impact of the fall as my bones shattered, but death never came. Lying motionless on the cold, black asphalt of an unknown, abandoned city, I waited. It was the only thing I could do. Eventually, the excruciating torment started to fade, and my body began to mend itself until I was able to move again. I realized then that pain and suffering existed in hell, but death did not. The suicide attempt accelerated the horror that hell had to offer, punishing me for trying to escape. My existence became immensely worse as the shadow began its hunt. I'm not certain what it is, but I always knew it was near. I would become overwhelmed with a familiar fear as it approached me. One night, I caught a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye. A tall, black humanoid figure darting quickly behind buildings and trees. I could feel it getting closer as my anxiety grew, a creeping paranoia that consumed me. I was taking a shortcut through a debilitated apartment complex. The double doors around the back of the building were open, and a flickering fluorescent light partially illuminated the narrow hallway. I sprinted inside. Halfway down the corridor, the lights went out. Darkness flooded the building, and I made a critical mistake. I froze. After a few moments, the hair on my back and my neck stood straight up, and I knew it was behind me. I tried to run, but it was too late. With a high-pitched howl, the shadow had me. its cold, dead hands wrapped around my arms as it sank hundreds of needle-like teeth into the top of my skull. The pain was indescribable. My blood drained into its salivating mouth, and I started to lose consciousness. I thrashed around in a fit of pain, terror, and desperation. Somehow pulling my head free of its fangs, I ran as fast as I could, and it shrieked an inhuman, ear-piercing scream that I will never forget. I quickly learned that traveling in the evening was no longer an option. I barricaded myself in any shelter I could find every night. The shadow paced outside my door each evening, snarling, sniffing, and tearing at my makeshift bunkers until the dim sunlight drove it off. A dull rumble woke me on my last day in hell. I unlocked the door on the small 2-bedroom house I'd been sleeping in and walked outside to investigate the unfamiliar noise. The ground quaked violently as I knelt down to keep my balance. Then I saw the corpses, dozens of them lined along the street in perfectly straight rows. Each seemed to be in various states of decomposition, ranging from recently deceased to walking skeletons with strips of hanging rotted flesh. I walked closer to get a better look, and they seemed to pose no threat. In groups of 4, the corpses walked hand in hand toward a massive swimming pool-sized hole in the ground near the center of the neighborhood. Without hesitation, a group would fall in, and after a few seconds, the next group would follow suit in a sort of synchronized group suicide. As I watched, the world around me shook once again with incredible force, knocking me to the ground. The hole began rapidly expanding. Hell was collapsing on itself, swallowing everything in sight. I turned and ran as fast as I could. It was no use. After only a few moments, I was right at the edge of the hole. I clawed at the ground in desperation until I completely lost my grip. I accepted my fate. Dozens of cold hands reached out of the darkness and grabbed my legs as I heard the familiar shriek. Fingernails and bones dug into my flesh and pulled me in. As I fell, my chest and stomach swelled. The endless freefall filled my entire body with an intense tingling sensation. I clenched my eyes shut in fear of what I would see as I hit the ground. I knew that death would not be an option. I felt a tremendous jolt, and electric pain filled my chest. My eyelids ripped open, and I stared into a harsh white light. I woke up in an emergency room back on Earth. According to the paramedics, I was only dead for 5 seconds. 1 for each year I spent in hell. I began rambling about all that I had seen and been through. No one seemed to acknowledge or believe me. This story is not a lesson. I'm not telling you to change your life or be a better person. This is a warning. If nothing is going well in your life, it might not be a coincidence. You may be in hell.